Hey, welcome back to Cheating Wife, the best channel for cheating stories. Like and subscribe to the channel for cheating stories like this. It's been 4 years and I thought I was past it, but after this Memorial Day, I'm not and I need advice. I've been following these subreddits for a while, thinking that simply reading other people's tales would help me. Or if I could find someone in a comparable scenario and learn from them, but I think my situation is unique. So let's get started. First and foremost, let me be clear. I don't mind if you believe this is a hoax. I don't mind if you tear me a new one after I rant. It has already occurred. I assumed I was okay. I thought I had moved on, but that was until last weekend. It all came back to me, and the rage I had back then returned in full force. Even now I'm back at home with my fiancée. My rage against my ex will not go away. I thought I was okay after spending years in anger management for what she did and the scenario she created. I just turned 39 years old. Marisol, my ex, and I met when I was 18 years old. I was with the Latin Kings at the time. I'd been a member since I was 13, and I was always in and out of trouble. Marisol attended church. My grandma pulled me to Sunday Mass, and it was love at first sight when I saw her. I asked my cousin, who was her friend, if he might introduce us, but he declined. He didn't want me to annoy her. He didn't want me to waste her time. Have you ever met someone with whom you wish to improve your relationship? Wanted to be the guy who always chose the correct path? That's her. When I discovered she went to church virtually every day, I stayed out on the stairs and spoke to her. I used to walk her to and from church. She made me feel as though I weren't useless. One thing led to another, and we were dating, and I was overjoyed. I had been pushing myself away from gang life for a year and a half, getting my GED, being a regular churchgoer, and planning my future when I was unwittingly drawn back in. I was at a shop when I ran across someone I used to have issues with. They were yelling at each other, and I swear I tried to ignore it. I simply walked away and let them chat, but then I was stabbed in the shoulder blade and went insane, beating the out of him. When I was detained, it seemed as if all I had done to improve my life had evaporated. Marisol was irritated with me, my grandma kept bringing up my prior faults, and my cousin told me that he knew I wouldn't change. My public defender observed me attempting to improve myself and, by God's grace, got me out of jail after a month. Marisol came to see me virtually every day, despite her displeasure with me. I found out I was going to be a father a month after I came out, and I didn't want my child to have a father who was dead or in prison. We eloped, I enrolled in a trade school to become a mechanic, and I worked my tail off for my future family. Luna's birth was nearly the worst day of my life. Marisol refused to stop bleeding. She fell into shock and had a double hysterectomy. Luna became my world when she was in the hospital for months. I wanted her life to be the greatest it could be, and I wanted to offer her everything. When Marisol was freed, I promised her that our kid would have a better life than we had, and I honored that promise for years. I saved enough money to relocate us to the suburbs, become a homeowner, and, believe it or not, I was a Girl Scout leader. I made sure Luna attended to private school, that she understood how to protect herself, and that I was always the ideal spouse. I didn't know who my parents were. I didn't have a good male role model in my childhood, therefore I didn't know what a healthy relationship looked like. That's a lie, my male role models were TV dads, and I mimicked them and the marriage they had on TV. My cousin became a pastor, my grandma was still a bother and my connection with my wife was better than ever, and I made sure I retained my prison physique, but Luna despised me. She's been hating me since she was 13. She refused to let me embrace her. Every time I told her I loved her, she rolled her eyes. When I asked her about her day at school, she ignored me. Marisol noticed how much that wounded me. She said she was a teenager and that I should simply let it go. She will return to me. It was like that for 2 years. So I wanted to go all out for her quinceañera. She got everything she wanted and she was still rude, and the old me nearly came out to put her in her place, but instead, I went to my cousin and expressed my irritation and fears about being a good parent, and he advised me to just leave her be and said a prayer for me. For the father-daughter dance, I wanted a slide display. I acquired most of the images of us together, but then I realized I didn't have any current ones of us. She refused to take any. I had images of her and me smiling with me on her 13th birthday, but they were on my daughter's shattered tablet. I grabbed the medication and proceeded to a repair shop, without caring about the expense. That tablet needs to be repaired. After a day and $300. I was relieved when the technician repaired it. I had her password, but I never bothered to invade her privacy. I merely needed those photographs, and they were there when I opened the tablet and looked in the gallery. My darling child, pleased to be with me and smiling. I felt fantastic. Then the instant messages began to come. My daughter was speaking to my wife. It was a lengthy conversation about why she didn't want me to dance with her, and it stung, but as my wife put it, she's a teenager. Then she said something that really crushed me. She contacted me, asking why she had to perform the father-daughter dance with me when I wasn't her father. My heart stopped beating, I became dizzy, my mouth dried up, and I needed to sit down. My wife said that since I reared her and loved her, I am her father. But Luna said that my cousin is her father and that she couldn't wait for her to become 18 so she can tell me the truth and live with her actual father. That she despised me and thanked God that I was not her father. Mary Soul started cursing her out, saying it was a mistake for my cousin to tell her the truth 2 years ago, and the more they spoke, the more enraged I became. For 15 years, my wife lied to me. My cousin, to whom I confided my problems with Luna and my anxieties of becoming a lousy parent, not only my wife, but also forced me to raise his kid. I wanted to inflict pain on them. I was filled with rage, despair, and anguish. If it makes sense, I wanted to scream, weep, and die all at the same moment. I went to a dark place and told Mary Soul that I needed to concentrate on work so I could pay the quints, but instead I drove to Manhattan and met my former public defender, who was no longer a low-level counsel. He worked at a big, upscale company in Midtown East. I was astonished he recognized me, but I was reportedly his first case as a public defender. I sat him down and told him everything. I gave him the tablet, and as he switched it on, the messages began to pour in. Only this time, Luna was speaking to my cousin, her biological father, who was pleading with her to give me a chance. How I was always there for her, but Luna said he was as well. It seemed sense that they had so much in common, and she even addressed him as Poppy many times throughout their talk, to which he reacted by telling her that she was his little daughter. We discussed our alternatives, and when he asked what I wanted to do, I told him I wanted to go full scorched earth. I wanted to poison the well, and he asked me multiple times and agreed each time. I also informed him that everything had to be submitted to the quints in 2 weeks, so we sat down and spent the next 12 hours doing what needed to be done, and I meticulously followed his directions. I quietly listed my company for sale. I called the private school and informed them that I would not be paying for the next year. I closed my student accounts and Luna's funds and prepared to list my property for sale online. Nobody was any wiser. I meticulously followed his recommendations. There was just one item from which I departed. Quince Day has arrived. That particular day went off without a hitch. The whole family was present. Luna was having a good time. Mary Soul kept asking whether I was all right, and I lied to her. It was difficult lying to her since I had never lied to her from the day I met her, and over those 2 weeks, I kissed her, hugged her, and made love to her every time. It was difficult not to shout at her. It was difficult not to despise her. She willingly allowed me to raise another man's kid. She slept with my cousin, a guy I viewed as my brother, my child's godfather, the best man when I eloped, and my confidant. To say the least, the wrath was difficult to contain. I summoned her to the middle of the stage when it was time for the father-daughter dance. She stepped over, despite her displeasure. I was listening to music when she smiled at me, and it tore me apart. I'd wanted to see that grin for years, but suddenly I didn't. I had the slideshow playing as we danced. Pictures of the two of us, as well as screen pictures of her text chats with her mother and her father, appeared towards the conclusion of the song. Needless to say, this was not a good sign. Mary Soul seemed to have seen a ghost, Luna just gazed at the enormous screen, and my cousin glanced at me in terror. Mary Soul went up to me and said she could explain, and I informed her I had filed for divorce. That she would be able to explain it in court. I drew back as she grabbed my arm and begged me. I told Luna that I worked my tail off to give her the world, and she now doesn't deserve it. I started walking away, but not before warning my cousin that every time I see him, I'm going to knock him out, and then I did. The fallout was severe. Mary Soul and Luna were at my grandmother's house. Her family was astonished and horrified by her and refused to have anything to do with her. Her father did apologize to me. I'm not sure why. Despite turning my life around, he never liked me. That guy despised me, but suddenly I was the ideal spouse and parent, but just a few days before I was the former piece of. My grandmother had the guts to tell me about Abraham's narrative, about how when he returned from war 3 years later, his wife had a 1-year-old kid and he raised him as his own, and how I should be like Abraham, so I ordered her to get the out of my home. Mary Soul arrived a few days later, weeping as soon as she saw me and told me it was an accident. She was very upset at me when I was detained, and my cousin was there to soothe her, And one thing led to another, and they had sex. It occurred just once, and she has been true to me ever since. To prove it, she was ready to undergo a lie detector test. When I asked her how long she had known Luna wasn't hers, she burst into tears. That look she gave me said it all. She knew from the start and requested her to leave. She wanted to go to therapy, assuring me that I was being too dramatic and that we could make it work. It was the past, and I needed to move on. Despite what occurred, I am Luna's father, and I let my rage get the better of me. I must have said get over it? At least a dozen times loudly while her and threw it out the door. I referred to her as a liar. I told her I didn't want to see her filthy face again, and that this life I'd constructed for her no longer belonged to her before forcing her out the door. Stay tuned for the next part.